3 years ago, my best friend looked me dead in the eyes at my own engagement party and told me I was the luckiest woman alive. She hugged me so tight I could smell her perfume, that vanilla and sandalwood she always wore, and she whispered, "I'm so happy for you." I believed her. I had believed her for 15 years. I found out the truth on a Tuesday in March. I came home early from a client meeting that got canceled. My best friend, the woman who had been my maid of honor, my emergency contact, my person, was sitting on my kitchen counter in my apartment, wearing my fiancé shirt, while they made plans for after the wedding. Not plans to end the affair, plans to continue it. I stood in the hallway long enough to hear them talk through the logistics. He would keep the apartment we'd chosen together for stability. She would move in 3 months after the wedding once things settled. They were so comfortable. Laughing even. Like I was already a problem that had been solved. I didn't scream. I didn't throw anything. I remember thinking how strange it was that my hands weren't shaking. I set my bag down on the console table by the door, quietly, because some part of me didn't want to interrupt them, and then I walked back out. I drove to a parking lot outside a Target on Route 9, and sat in my car for 2 hours. Then I went back, told him to leave, and spent the next 3 days figuring out how to dismantle a life I had been building for 4 years. The engagement was off. The venue deposit was gone. The caterer had a no-refund policy. And my best friend of 15 years didn't call me once. She texted eventually, "I know you're angry. Can we talk when you're ready?" I never responded. I changed my number 2 weeks later. Her name was Audrey. His name was Scott. I don't use those names much anymore. I should back up, because none of this makes sense without knowing what Audrey and I were to each other. We met freshman year at the University of Michigan. I was 18. She was 18. And we were assigned to the same floor in East Quad. She was from a suburb of Columbus. I was from just outside Detroit, and we bonded immediately over being too close to home to feel like we'd really left, but too far to go back on a whim. She was funny in a way that made everyone in the room feel included. She remembered birthdays. She remembered the names of your siblings. She remembered what you'd mentioned in passing 3 months ago. She made people feel seen. That was her gift. And for 15 years, I thought she used it because she genuinely cared. Now, I think she used it because knowing things about people gave her a kind of power, and she liked that more than she ever liked the people themselves. But I didn't see that then. For most of my 20s, Audrey was the constant. Jobs changed, apartments changed, relationships came and went, and Audrey was always there. She was there when my dad had his first heart surgery. She flew to Phoenix when I got the job offer that changed my career. She sat with me in a Walgreens parking lot at midnight when a pregnancy test came back positive for someone else's baby that turned out not to be mine after all. The details of that are a different story. And she never once made me feel like a burden. So when she said she was happy for me at my engagement party, I believed her. Why wouldn't I? Scott and I had been together for 4 years by then. He was good-looking in an uncomplicated way. Tall, dark hair, the kind of easy confidence that reads as charisma until you know him well enough to realize it's just a low tolerance for being questioned. I loved him. Or I loved the version of him I'd constructed. Looking back, I'm not sure he ever let me see the real one. I introduced him to Audrey about 6 months into dating. She approved immediately. "He's solid," she told me. I like solid. I remember feeling relieved by that, which should have told me something about the dynamic I was operating in, that I needed her approval to fully trust my own judgment. But again, I didn't see it then. What I do know, piecing things together after the fact, is that whatever happened between Audrey and Scott started somewhere around the 18-month mark. Small things that didn't register at the time, her being at our apartment more than seemed necessary, him mentioning her name in context where it didn't quite fit, a shift in the way she talked about him. Slightly too familiar, like she'd downgraded him from impressive to ordinary. The way you do with someone, once you know their flaws up close. By the time he proposed to me at his parents' lake house in northern Michigan, on a dock at sunset with his whole family watching, whatever was happening between them had been going on for over a year. I don't know when I stopped being a person to either of them and became an inconvenient storyline to manage. But I know it happened before the ring went on my finger. The year after I left was the kind of year that either makes you or quietly destroys you. And for a while, I genuinely wasn't sure which one it was going to be. I threw myself into work. I'm a project manager for an architecture firm in Chicago. I'd moved there from Ann Arbor after graduate school, and the city had always felt like mine in a way that nowhere else had. After Scott, I let it be mine again. I stopped spending weekends the way couples spend weekends and started spending them the way I actually wanted to: farmers markets, long walks along the lakefront, dinner at the bar by myself with a book, a pottery class on Thursday evenings that I was genuinely terrible at and didn't care. I went to therapy. That part was not optional. I was carrying too much, and I knew it. My therapist, a no-nonsense woman with reading glasses she wore pushed up on her head like a headband, helped me untangle what had actually happened from the story I was telling myself about it. The story I was telling myself involved a lot of words, like naive and stupid, and how did I not see it? The actual story was simpler and more survivable. I had trusted two people who had decided at some point that their wants mattered more than my reality. That wasn't a character flaw in me. It was a choice they made. By the second year, I had stopped flinching when I heard his name. By the end of the second year, I had mostly stopped thinking about either of them at all, except occasionally at night when the brain does what it wants. And then, around the time I hit the 2.5-year mark, I met someone at a project kickoff meeting for a mixed-use development in the West Loop. His name was Callum. He was the lead structural engineer from the firm we were partnering with. He was quiet in a way I initially mistook for reserved, and then realized was just thoughtful. He didn't speak until he had something worth saying, which is rarer than it sounds. He had a dry sense of humor that came out sideways, in asides and small observations that you'd miss if you weren't paying attention. I was paying attention. He asked me to dinner about 3 weeks after we started working together. I said I didn't date people from active projects. He said that was a completely reasonable policy and that he respected it. Then he asked if I'd like to get coffee instead, on a Sunday, when neither of us would technically be on the clock. I said yes. Coffee became dinner eventually. Dinner became weekends. Somewhere in there, without either of us making a big production of it, it became something I hadn't felt in a long time, something that didn't require me to perform a version of myself that would hold his attention. He liked the actual version, even the parts I'd spent years editing down. We got married 14 months after that first Sunday coffee. Small ceremony, just family and close friends, at a venue overlooking the lake. My maid of honor was my younger sister, Wren, who cried through the entire thing and apologized for it approximately 4 times during the reception. It was the best day of my life, and nobody there was performing anything. I want to be clear about something before I get to the part you're probably waiting for. I was not thinking about Audrey at the gala. I had genuinely moved on from her in the way that you move on from something that hurt you badly, not by forgetting it, but by putting it in the correct category. She was in the category of things that happened that I survived. She wasn't in the category of things I think about. There's a difference, and by the time the gala came around, I had been living in the second category for well over a year. The gala was a fundraiser for an affordable housing nonprofit that Callum sits on the board of. He'd been involved with the organization for years before we met. It's connected to work he cares about. Workforce housing, the way cities price out the people who make them run. And the annual gala was a significant event on our calendar. Black tie, downtown Chicago, a hotel ballroom with floor-to-ceiling windows and a view of the river. I'd attended the previous year and genuinely enjoyed it. I was wearing a deep green gown I'd found at a consignment shop in Lincoln Park. Silk charmeuse, minimal jewelry, simple. Callum wore a charcoal tuxedo and looked better than he had any right to look for a man who had spent that morning under a sink trying to fix a slow drain. We had drinks in the hotel bar with a few of his colleagues before heading up to the ballroom. I was relaxed. I was happy. We were about 40 minutes into the cocktail hour when I spotted her across the room. Audrey. She looked expensive, which she always had. She'd come from money and she'd made more of it in the years since college. Something in financial consulting, I gathered from the occasional mutual friend update I hadn't managed to avoid. Her dress was ivory, which felt like a choice. She was standing with a group of people near one of the high-top tables, holding a champagne flute, laughing at something someone had said. She looked exactly the same. That was disorienting. I had somehow expected the years to have done something more visible to her. I turned away before she saw me and spent a few minutes deciding how I felt about it. Not panicked, not angry exactly. More like braced. The way you feel when unexpected weather rolls in and you don't have an umbrella. You're not destroyed by it. You just adjust. I found Callum talking to one of the board members near the windows. I touched his arm. He turned toward me, and I said quietly, "My former best friend is here, the one I told you about." He didn't ask questions. He just said, "Do you want to leave?" I said no. He nodded and handed me his drink. I navigated the room carefully for the next 20 minutes, mingled, chatted, accepted a second glass of champagne from a passing tray. I was doing fine. And then she found me. Oh my God, Waverly, that was my name in her mouth. That particular inflection, half surprised, half delighted, the voice she used when she wanted you to feel like running into you, was the best thing that had happened to her all week. I had heard that voice for 15 years and believed it every time. Standing there in a ballroom in downtown Chicago wearing a green dress and a wedding ring she had no idea about, I felt it land differently. "Audrey," I said. "I can't believe it," she said, moving in for a hug I neither invited nor blocked. She smelled like the same perfume. Vanilla and sandalwood. "You look incredible. How are you?" "It's been, God, what has it been?" "About 3 years," I said. Something moved across her face at that acknowledgement, maybe, of what the 3 years meant. And then she smoothed it over quickly. She was good at that. "Right," she said. "Right. Well, you really do look amazing. What are you doing now? Are you still at the architecture firm?" "I am," I said. "Senior project manager now." "Of course you are." She smiled like she was proud of me, which was such a specific kind of audacity that I had to admire it for a second. "I'm in town for a conference." I didn't expect to be at something like this. A colleague had a last-minute conflict and passed along the ticket. She was filling in the air, the way she always did when she was slightly off balance. "Are you here alone?" "No," I said. She tilted her head, and I watched her eyes do a quick scan of the room. "Oh? Anyone I know?" "My husband," I said. The word landed. I saw it land. Her expression didn't collapse. She was too practiced for that. But there was a pause that lasted about a half-second too long, and in that half-second her whole face rearranged itself into something that was trying very hard to look like warmth. "You got married?" she said. "When?" "That's... Wow, congratulations." "Thank you," I said. She looked around again, searching. And then something shifted in her eyes, a calculation or maybe just curiosity, and she looked back at me with the smile still in place but something different underneath it. "You know what," she said, and her voice picked up a different quality, that particular cadence she had when she was about to say something designed to make you feel small. "It's so good to see you doing well. Honestly, I always worried about you after everything. You were so... I don't know. I just knew you'd find your footing eventually." A small pause, perfectly timed. It took a little while, but you got there. There it was. The needle slid in sideways. "I got there," I agreed pleasantly. She pressed on. She always pressed when she thought she had the advantage. "Scott and I are actually getting married in the fall," she said. "We're doing the whole thing in Tuscany. A villa outside Florence. It's been a process, let me tell you. Destination weddings are no joke." She laughed lightly. "But you know how Scott is about doing things the right way. Very all or nothing." She was watching me carefully while she said it, looking for the flinch. I didn't flinch. I noted with some detachment that I genuinely did not care that Scott was marrying Audrey in Tuscany. They could get married on the moon and I would feel approximately this amount of invested, which was not at all. "That sounds beautiful," I said. And then, because I am a human being and not a saint, and she had just slid a needle into me in a ballroom in front of people, "You know, I should introduce you to my husband. He just finished up a conversation over there. Let me grab him." She looked pleased. She thought this was going to be awkward for me. I found Callum about 20 feet away near the bar and I caught his eye. He came over immediately, warm and unhurried, the way he moves through most things. I took his hand. "Callum," I said, "this is Audrey, an old friend from college." He smiled, extended his hand. Great to meet you." And Audrey looked at him. She looked at him the way you look at someone when your brain is trying to place them and the answer is coming in too fast and you're not ready for it. The color in her face changed. Not dramatically, she would never let it go dramatic, but it changed. Her eyes went very still. The champagne glass in her hand stopped moving. Because Callum had grown up in Columbus, Ohio, and he had gone to the same high school as Audrey. Not only that, he had been the year above her, and from what he had told me, they had run in connected circles. He had known her. Not well, not intimately, but enough. Enough for her to know exactly who he was, and enough for her to know, as she stood there in her ivory dress with her Tuscany wedding and her sideways needles, that he had heard things about her. That people who knew her from before she reinvented herself knew things she preferred to leave in Columbus. Callum, to his credit, gave nothing away. He was polite and easy, as he always is, making the kind of small talk that fills a few minutes without leaving any marks. But Audrey knew that he knew, and she knew that I had to know too, or at least that I could if I wanted to. The power dynamic in that small circle of three had shifted completely in about 4 seconds. "It was so nice to run into you," I said after a minute. "Enjoy the rest of the evening, Audrey." I didn't wait for a response. Callum and I walked toward the windows, and he squeezed my hand once, which was all the commentary the moment needed. We got a drink at the bar on the far side of the room and stood there for a minute, watching the city lights on the river. "That was her," Callum said. It wasn't a question. "That was her," I said. "And you're okay?" I checked, the way I'd learned to check. Honestly, not reflexively. No, I was not spiraling. No, there was no grief I'd been managing suddenly surfacing. What I felt, standing there with the lights on the river and my husband beside me and that conversation receding behind us, was something cleaner than I expected. I felt done, not in an angry way. Not in a triumphant way, exactly, though I'd be lying if I said there wasn't some satisfaction in how it had played out. Just done in the way that you're done when something that used to have weight has finally finished weighing anything. "I'm okay," I said. "I'm actually really okay." And I meant it. We left the gala an hour later. Walked back to our apartment. We only lived about 6 blocks from the hotel, and changed out of our formal clothes and made grilled cheese sandwiches at midnight because neither of us had eaten enough at the event, and fancy appetizers are never actually filling. Callum told me the full story of knowing Audrey in high school, not dramatic, not salacious, just the context. She had been known in those circles for a particular habit of befriending girls who had things she wanted and then systematically positioning herself to take them. He'd watched it happen to a couple of people. He'd never thought about it much because it was high school, and high school produces its own particular varieties of small cruelty, but he recognized her the moment I introduced them. "Did you know before tonight," I asked, "that she was the one?" "I didn't know her last name," he said. "You'd only ever called her Audrey. When you said her name just now, I wasn't sure at first. And then I saw her face when she saw me, and I was sure." I thought about that. The fact that the person she'd run her whole playbook on, befriend the girl, want what she has, take it, had, without any design or intention, become my husband. That wasn't justice in any clean, scripted sense. It wasn't a plan I'd executed. It was just life, continuing past the point where she thought she'd written my ending. "Did it feel weird?" I asked. "Seeing her?" "A little," he said honestly. "Mostly I was thinking about you." I sat with that for a moment. "She's marrying Scott," I said. "In Tuscany." Callum bit into his sandwich. "Good place for a wedding," he said mildly. I laughed. I laughed more than the comment deserved, probably, but it was the right thing to say at the right time. It was so perfectly, correctly not a big deal that I loved him for it. I've thought a lot, in the months since the gala, about what I would say to my 32-year-old self, the one sitting in the Target parking lot on Route 9, not shaking, not crying yet, just sitting. What would I tell her? I think I'd tell her to let herself feel it sooner. The crying came eventually, weeks later, in the shower. And it was the kind of crying that comes from the deepest part of the chest, the kind you can't explain out loud because the words aren't big enough. I wish I'd let that happen earlier instead of managing it for so long. I'd tell her that the vanilla and sandalwood perfume is eventually going to stop meaning anything. That day actually comes. I'd tell her that the apartment she's about to give up, the one Scott is keeping, the one she loved, the one with the corner windows and the old radiators that clicked all winter, is just an apartment. She's going to find another one with better light. And I'd tell her that the thing she thinks she lost, the 15 years, the history, the person who knew her better than almost anyone, she didn't fully lose that. She still has the 15 years. She still has who she was in them. What she lost was someone who was never fully giving her what she thought she was getting. That's a different kind of grief. Smaller, actually, once you hold it right. I'm 37 now. I live 6 blocks from a hotel where I once ran into a woman I used to love like a sister. I work a job I'm good at in a city I chose, with a person who chose me back and keeps choosing me, daily, in the small and unglamorous ways that actually constitute a life. I have a pottery class on Thursday evenings, and I am still genuinely terrible at it and still don't care. I don't know what Audrey's life looks like now, and that's not a performance of indifference. I actually don't think about it. She's in the correct category. Things I survived. The last thing I remember from that night at the gala, after the grilled cheese and the conversation and Callum falling asleep on my shoulder on the couch with the TV on low, is looking at the window and thinking, she thought she took something from me. She didn't know she handed me the whole rest of my life. I used to think the worst part of what Audrey did was the betrayal itself. The affair, the planning, the two of them in my apartment talking through a future that had no room for me in it. But sitting with it now, years later, I think the worst part was actually smaller than that. It was the hug at my engagement party, the "I'm so happy for you." The way she looked me in the eyes and meant none of it, and I felt so certain that she did. That's the thing about people who use kindness as a tool. They're genuinely good at it. They make you feel seen, and that feeling is real even when the person producing it isn't being honest. For a long time, I blamed myself for not seeing through it. I stopped doing that. Seeing through a convincing performance isn't a failure of intelligence. It's just the cost of being someone who trusts people at face value, and that's not a character flaw worth punishing yourself over. What I've come to understand, though, is that what happened to me was also the result of choices I was making without fully realizing it. Not the choice to trust Audrey, that was reasonable given what I knew, but the choice to outsource my own judgment. I remember needing her approval before I could fully trust what I felt about Scott. That's not her fault. That's something I had to look at honestly in myself, and therapy helped me do that. When you hand someone else the authority over your own instincts for long enough, you stop knowing how to trust them. Getting that back, learning to hear my own read on a situation and act on it, that was slower and harder than anything else in those 2 years. But it was also the most important work I did. Audrey didn't lose anything the night she saw Callum at the gala. She went home probably and told herself a story that made her the protagonist. People like that always do. But I think she felt, in that moment, the specific discomfort of realizing that the ending she wrote for someone else didn't hold. That the woman she'd mentally filed under sad and behind had built a life she couldn't locate a foothold in. That's not justice in any dramatic sense. It's just what happens when someone survives longer than you expected them to. What got me through the parking lot outside that Target, and the months after, and the slow process of rebuilding something I actually wanted, it wasn't anger, though there was anger. It wasn't even hope, exactly, because I didn't have enough information yet to know what I was hoping for. It was just a decision, made quietly and without ceremony, to keep going. To not let the story end in that hallway. To get up the next day and be a person, even when being a person felt like significant effort. I'm not special for having done that. Most people who get knocked flat eventually stand back up. But I think there's something worth saying about the choice to stand up without bitterness. To not let what someone did to you become the organizing principle of who you are afterward. That took longer. That took real effort and real honesty, and honestly, a lot of Thursday evening pottery classes that went nowhere. Callum fell asleep on my shoulder that night after the gala, and I looked at the window and thought about how far the story had traveled from that hallway. Audrey thought she took something from me. She didn't know, she just moved me out of her way. and straight into everything that actually mattered.